We are talking about cash controls for Chapter 5. Cash controls are important because otherwise you end up losing a check for $164. We're really looking for a check for $164 right now. Really. So it's important that you have procedures set up so that way you don't end up losing money or misplacing cash. So one of the first things we're going to be talking about in this section is going to be called endorsements. Okay? Endorsements are what you do on the back of the check so that way it can be cashed. Now there are three types of endorsements. There's a blank, a special, and a restrictive. Okay, and I'd like to explain the difference between all of them. A blank endorsement is the riskiest. And here's my example. So, Ellie writes me a check. Okay, so it's made payable to Mrs. Grassel. I take a look at the check, and on the back of it, I sign my name, Mrs. Grassel, on the back of it, and I put it in my back pocket with my phone, and I walk out of school today, and I grab my phone, and what happens to that check sometimes? Falls out of the back pocket, right? That's happened to us, right? Something's in your pocket with your phone, you pull it out, and that falls out. But this check that Ellie made payable to me, I already signed the back of it. You know what I mean? And you flip it over on the back side, you would sign it with my signature. Now, Tyson finds this check, and he sees that I already signed the back of it. Tyson can now go to the bank and he can cash it. Did you know that? The minute that I sign the back of it, that means it can be cashed by anyone. I never sign my checks until I'm already at the bank. Like, I will take the extra time at the counter or at the drive-thru, and I'm going to sign them right there. Because I don't want the risk of that. Because I can't go back to Ellie and say, oh, Ellie, I lost my check. And she's like, it's already been cashed. I'm not going to write you another one, because whose fault is it that I lost the check? It's all on me, right? So we need to do different things. So we have different types of endorsements that help us to protect. Now, you have probably seen a business that if I were to go to Don's and I write a check out to Don's, okay, so I stand there, I write out my check, they bring up my sales, I give the check to the cashier. What does that person do immediately with my check? What machine? Oh. What do you think? Does it put it in the box? They look at it, and what do they do when they look at it? Make sure that they look at the name, because they actually, most businesses do have a list of people that they will not accept checks from because they've been naughty in the past. They bounce checks, written a lot of NSF funds. NSF is probably a phrase that you see, but you probably don't know what that stands for. Does anyone know it? Non-sufficient funds. Basically, that means I write a check for $2,000 and I have $100 in my account. That doesn't work that way, right? I have insufficient funds within my account to cover what the check was payable for. So then what happens is it can be very expensive for a business to accept checks if they are bouncing them. Bouncing is another phrase for insufficient funds. What happens is, myself as a business, if I go to cash Katie's check that she wrote for me, the bank comes back to me and says, all right, this check is no good. They now charged me money, and that could be anywhere from $30 to $50 plus that they tried to cash the check and it didn't work. So myself as a business, I wanted to cash her check for $20, but now I don't get that $20. I've been added a fee of $30 to $50, let's say. Let's just say 30 to keep math a little bit easier, okay? Now, so I am charged a fee. How about Katie? Is Katie charged a fee? Yes. Katie is also charged a fee. A bank will go through, if you try to write a check and it doesn't clear or there's not enough money in your account, that bank will charge you a fee associated with it. So Katie's check for $20, the bank is going to charge her, let's say $30 as well. We'll just keep our fees a little bit the same. So now, how much money is she short out of her account? $50, right? Okay, so it cost her $50 because she didn't have 20, and now they took 30 off. So her account, it's really easy if you get into a point where you don't have enough money in your account and you keep writing checks for your fees to be greater than what you wrote the check for. Does that make sense? Right here is a perfect example. Her check was for 20, but I'm getting charged $30 in fees. Now, what am I going to do as a business because I tried to cash that check and it didn't clear? I'm going to contact her, and instead of her paying me $20, what does she have to pay me? $50, right? Because I still need her to pay for the product, which was $20, but she needs to cover the cost of that fee that I was given as a business. So now she has to write me $50. But she also has a $30 fee from her bank. So how much now did it cost her? $80. Does that make sense? So you have to watch out for NSF funds. That's why anytime you go through a business, they'll probably have a sign by the cash register saying NSF fee would be $30, $55, $60, whatever it may be. There are some businesses that don't even accept checks at all. Can anyone think of a business that doesn't accept checks? Foot Locker? Red Robin?
What's that?
Restaurant? Yum. Red Robin? It's a restaurant. They serve hamburgers. There's one in Green Bay. I don't think there's one in Appleton, though.
Yeah, there is.
Is there? Where?
It's right by the Coal.
Yeah. Is it on the west side? Not by the mall? Okay. So Red Robin, I know that they don't accept checks. And here's the thing. Businesses don't accept checks because it takes longer for them to know if the money is cleared. Okay? Because if all of you were customers for me and you wrote checks to it, and it's 7 o'clock at night and I accept your checks, when's the earliest I'm going to get to the bank? Okay, unless it's Friday. If it's Friday, it's not going to get to the bank until Monday, right, for things to clear. So maybe I can get to the bank the next morning, but then it's going to take time for that bank to process all the checks. So maybe it's not until the following work day. So if you came in on Tuesday night and paid me a check, I might not know until Thursday that your check didn't clear. But if you don't accept checks and you only accept plastic, does that make sense, like a debit card or a credit card, well, you know immediately. Okay? The only thing a business has to be concerned about is there are merchant fees that go along with using a debit or a credit card. So basically what happens, have you been to places where they say a minimum charge for a debit card may be $5 or something like that? And the reason being is because there are fees associated. Anytime that you swipe something with plastic, they're going to give you an additional fee to that. So if you went to Don's and it cost $5, Don's is not really getting $5 back. They may be getting $4.65 because the credit card company has a fee that they use to process to make sure the card is not stolen, that it's valid, any of those types of things. So businesses lose a little bit of money, but they also make up it because more people now are paying with plastic than with checks. Would you agree? Okay. So we have different types of endorsements. So when I go to Don's and I write a check to Don's, one of the first things they do is they look to see who it's from, how much it's made out for, right? Did I sign it? And then they physically put it right into the machine, the cash register machine, and they actually put it up there, and then the cash register actually prints right on the back side of it in the endorsement area where you would just sign your name. Okay? And what it will do is it will actually print immediately on that check the endorsement that is going to be deposited to the account of Don's Quality Market, and it's going to give the account number for it. The reason being is the minute that business is accepting a check, they want to put their endorsement on it because, therefore, the only way that check can be cashed is by putting it into that one account. It doesn't matter if somebody else tried to sign their name below it because the endorsement is restricted on this is the only thing that can happen. So when my husband, and we have checks that we need to have deposited, and he takes it in there, I will write on the back of my checks, I don't just sign my name because I'm not with him, and something can happen between when he gets it to goes to the bank that it could be lost. I write on there, deposit to the account of, I write our account title on it, and then I sign it. Because the only thing that can happen to that check is what? Put into that account. It doesn't matter who has it. Even if Tyson found it on the way to school, if he goes to the bank, the only thing the bank could do is put that into my account. So blank endorsement is the riskiest, but if you're just standing there at the bank and you're going to sign it over at that point, you might as well go ahead and do that. Restrictive only allows that certain thing to happen where you're going to put the name of the account and the account number that it's going to be deposited into. The third type is a special endorsement, and a special endorsement would be, so we have the check that Ellie wrote to me, and then I owe Carson the same amount, okay? So when Ellie writes me the check for $20 and I owe Carson $20, what I can do is I can, with the endorsement on the back of it, change ownership from me to Carson. Because otherwise I have to take Ellie's check, I have to go to the bank and get cash, then I got to find Carson, I got to give Carson cash. Okay? Not all businesses like to cash those special endorsements because they're not quite sure exactly what's going on. But those are our three types of endorsements that we're going to be working with, are going to be blank, special, and restrictive. Evan? Yep, and we'll go through and I'll give you some specific examples there. But it's important for you to realize a business needs to go through and deal with that. If you write a check to a business, if they don't put in their cash register, they might have a stamp that they immediately stamp on the back of it just so that they know what's going in there. There are some businesses that will accept checks, but they actually go through and they process all of those funds electronically. Does that make sense? And they physically give you the check back with the receipt saying, instead of us keeping the check, we go through a process with the bank. The bank goes into your bank account because your bank account number is listed on your check and the amount, and then they give you the check back because the funds have cleared electronically instead of waiting for that next day for the bank to go through and process it. All of those, again, require some fees onto that business, but the business then realizes they are going to increase their amount of sales by accepting those types of cards, which is why the school store this year has a square reader, because we have lots of people that are coming to basketball games, and we have items that cost $50+ down there, like you talk about stadium seats and some of the nicer sweatshirts. Not everyone has that amount of cash in there. They're like, oh, I'd like to have it, but I don't have cash, so that would then reduce our amount of sales. But we also have to make sure that our markup on those is going to cover the cost of our transaction fees. Otherwise, we end up selling it at a loss. Does that make a little bit of sense? So if we're selling our product for $45, we're probably going to be getting like $43.50, roughly $1.50 transaction fee. But if we are already selling it for sale item, are we actually losing money on that sale? Those are the things that you have to watch out for in a business. Okay, so we're talking about cash controls. The other thing we're going to be taking a look at is physically filling out a check and a check stub. How many people in here have written out a check before? So a couple people have. That's great. Not a lot of people use checks as much anymore. It's still important if you use a debit card that you still have a register, a blank register where you keep track of how much money is coming in and out, because we're going to be learning about reconciliation, where we go through and compare what the bank says we have in our account to what we really say we have. Banks make errors and we make errors, and I'm going to give examples of how those errors can occur. But every month, everyone needs to go through and reconcile their account. So let's get started with our endorsements here. Our directions have been up, so what we need to do is on the very top here, we have a spot that we need to fill in our endorsements. Okay, so for letter A, we need to do a blank endorsement. So typically what you do is you sign your name. So here in APSLIA, you type signature. But if you were really writing a check, you would write your name. So I would write Katie Grassel. Okay, so the second one we have to do is a special endorsement, and that's the example where Ellie wrote me the check and I transfer the check ownership to Carson. Okay, so right up here, I'm going to write paid to the order of who is going to get this check, and our directions say we're supposed to transfer ownership from us to Kelsey Sather. So we're going to pay to the order of Kelsey Sather, and then we have to sign our name yet. Does that make sense? So I am on the back of the check physically transferring ownership from our business to Kelsey Sather. Now, the restrictive endorsement really just says I'm only depositing it to this one account. So we're going to put the very first line is going to say for deposit only, the name of our account, Baltimore Lake Accounting, and then our signature. You will need to be able to do these types of endorsements on our test. Now, let's look at our check and check stubs. Now, most people that I see that have checks have duplicate copy checks. Do we know what that means?
Yeah,
Underneath, right? So they don't really have stubs on the side that they need to fill out. Has anyone ever seen checks that have stubs on the side? Okay. Oftentimes businesses will use this because they don't physically go out and shop at a store with a checkbook. They may send somebody out with the check. But the stubs are going to stay there. That's a little bit cleaner to look at and easier to use than those carbon papers that if you write on it, it'll go all the way through. So we have check stubs, and the stubs are going to appear on the left-hand side, and typically these checks would be kind of in a 3-ring binder. A little bit different than our normal 3-ring binder, but it would have a whole series of checks, and then the stubs would stay into our check account. So when we need to fill out checks for accounting land, what we need to do is we have to fill out our stub first. And the reason we fill out the stub first is because we need to make sure we always know what our balance of cash is. If I fill out the check first, I can get in a hurry and then forget to fill out the stub, and then I have no idea who the check is made payable to and for how much. So we always do the stub portion first and then fill out the check. When I look at the stub, we can see that this is going to be check number 78. Looking at our stub information going top to bottom on the left-hand side. On the very top, we put the amount in dollars. We put in the date, then the to. So here's my example. This is going to be one of the confusing things. So we have Mr. Inman up on the top, and you own the business. You own the building that my business is running out of. Okay. So I am going to write him a check, right? Because I have to pay him rent. Stop filling it out. We'll have time together, I promise you. If I write him the check, is that going to be accounts payable? What am I paying? Rent expense, right? So here's where it gets a little confusing, and that's one of the things we had to take a look at using our source documents is the for portion of our check stub. Truly, what is the check for? Not a lot of people go through and really fill out the for portion, but in business settings, you need to do that because just because you wrote a check out to this business does not necessarily mean that is what it was paid for. It's not necessarily going to be accounts payable. So the for would say like supplies, rent expense, prepaid insurance, those different things to give us information back to our accounts. So we have the date, we have the to, that's physically the business or the individual we're writing the check to. The for is going to give us information for the accounts that are being affected. Now the balance brought forward, they will always give you that amount or it should be pre-filled in there. Basically that's the amount of cash that that business has at that given moment. There are 2 spots on our amount on the bottom. There's a spot for us to do deposits and there's a spot for us to do checks. If I am writing out a check, what is happening to my balance of cash? Is it going up or down? Down. My balance of cash is going down. So I always have to subtract the amount of the check. If I'm doing a deposit, do I have more cash or less cash? More, right? So that would be an add. There are spots here where I have subtotals. You always need to fill in the subtotals. You can never leave it blank. Okay? So if we don't have a deposit, this section here will be left blank. But the subtotal portion needs to be filled in. Okay? If I don't have anything in other, this will be left blank, but the subtotal portion needs to be filled in. Right here is the amount of this check, and that's going to be written in numbers. That should be the same that's on the very top up there. And then I would subtract to find the balance carried forward. The other thing that you need to do is the balance carried forward on the bottom of one check stub. goes to the top of the next one. Does that make sense? Okay, so we fill out our stub first, then we fill out our check. And when we fill out our check, we start in the upper right-hand corner and we work our way down. So we start with the date, and then we do who is it made payable to. That's going to be the to portion from our stub. Right here is where we write the amount of the check in words. Physically, the words 45 point, and then we do 00 over 100 with our cents. The reason we have on a check, right here we write it as words, and right here we are going to be writing it as numbers, because the bank will go through to compare to see if someone modified how much this check is made payable for. So think about it. If I write a check up there to Jory for $100, is it hard to change $100 to $1,000? No. It's not, is it? I can easily draw 0 in there and make it look like $1,000. Is it hard for me to change the word $100 to the word $1,000? Okay, so that is why on a check we have the number written two ways. One is numbers and one is words, so that way the bank will go through and compare. Now, sometimes people make mistakes and they write it out for the wrong amount. They actually have to go through and sign off to say, yes, this is really the amount. But that is why on a check we have the numbers two ways, numbers and words. Okay, so this spot is numbers. Here is words. The for portion, this would be the same thing. We have the for on our check stub, rent, expense, supplies, whatever it may be. And the last thing we have right here is going to be our signature. And is it okay for everyone in the business to be able to write a check? Do you think I can write checks out for FBLA? I cannot. The only person that can sign checks here at the school is whom? Mrs. Wussel fills it out, but she can't sign them. Nope. That's a good guess, though. It's actually not Dr. W. Mr. Miller, the other person would be Mr. Zahn. And the reason it's Mr. Zahn versus Dr. W is because Mr. Miller is in charge of activities at athletics. Okay, and Mr. Miller gets to do it because he is the principal in charge of everything. So what has to happen here at the school, if I need a check, I have to fill out a requisition, I turn it in, it gets approved, and then Mr. Miller is the person that signs the check. I can't sign the check. Mrs. Wusso can't even sign the check. And the reason being, in a business, there needs to be checks and balances, because I can't go in and say, hey, FBLA needs a check for $3,000 to go shopping at Walmart. And they're going to go through and question that. Isn't it okay for them to question that? Right? In a business, you don't want everyone having access to the checking account, because then they're going to have people that are having some concerns. Now, I do believe there's a situation or a case going on right now with an Illinois police officer. Have you heard about that? They ruled his death a suicide, but they weren't really sure what was going on. After some investigation, they realized he was actually embezzling or taking money. That's what one of the alleged charges are right now, that he was embezzling money from a fund, because we need to have checks and balances. We can't have everyone just having access to the cash, because people will be like, oh, whatever, they're not going to miss $20. Here's another $40. And eventually they just take all the money and there's no checks and balances. So we have to have other people that are going through, and only certain people are authorized to sign checks, just because we need to know where our money's going. So check number 78, in our directions, they go through and tell us that our check is going to be made payable. Oh, we have to write our balance brought forward first, sorry. So right here in our check stub, I'm going to put $1,805.75. So I do that even before I fill out the check, because that's instruction number 2. Instruction number 3 tells me right here that I need to record a deposit of $489 on October 30th of the current year on check stub number 78. So I don't even care who this check is made payable to. I'm doing 10/30, and I have a deposit of $489. So we already talked about the fact I have my balance of $1,805. And then I'm adding to it $489. So my new balance should be $2,294.75. Will every check have a deposit on it? Not at all, okay? So there'll be lots of checks that this will be left blank. But that was instruction number 3. Instruction number 4 tells us to prepare the check stubs and write the following checks using October 30th of the current year as the date. Check number 78 is to Corner Garage for repairs, $162. Start in the upper side of my check stub, put in 162. The date is October 30th. It's made payable to Corner Garage, and it's for repairs. I don't have anything for the other column, so I put 162 down here. Excuse me, that is the wrong amount. $2,294.75. Down one line, I put 162, and I have to then subtract. Do we agree with my math? Did anyone double check my math? I'm good? All right. So, I just really did math going down here. I have to take this balance carried forward. Where does this go? Right here on my next check stub. Does that make sense? So my balance carried forward on the bottom of one check stub is the amount that I bring forward to the top of the next. I do all of this before I fill out anything on my actual check. Now I can fill out my check.